did like that. All right. Well, ladies and gentlemen, welcome to another episode here of Date Your Wife, the podcast. It's actually started. We already went.
Oh.
We already began. The show began literally 15 seconds ago. My name is Garrett J. White. I am your host. I am here with my beautiful wife and the queen of the kingdom, Danielle K. White. Let's talk about this real quick, this K thing. I added your middle initial. How you feel about this?
It's so formal. I mean, I don't need the K like you need the J.
I do need the J. But why don't you feel like you need the K? You don't feel any. I'm going to move this back so you don't have to like move forward as much. There you go. Why do you? Here, let me show you. Whoa, nice. Just kidding. All right. So why do you feel like the K is an improvement to your name situation?
No,
your mother gave you the name K.
Middle name.
Carrie.
It's fine. I feel like middle names are in case you get older and you don't like your first name, so then you have option to change it.
I like it. And in my case, you just add the middle initial because it's amazing, and that's what you do. Just throw a J in there. All right, today's focus on today's show is sex. How do you feel about this? The one you've been looking forward to the most, right?
I just think it's going to be fun to hear two different perspectives from both a male and female perspective. And forever, there was like a couple years where we were like battling this conversation, and I literally
couple years, like 10?
No, not that
like
bad.
A decade of struggle.
But you literally were like, you'd be like, you're just weird. You're not like most women. I'm like, I hate to break it to you, but I own a salon and I work just with women. I know women as well as you know men. So I think our perspective shifted on like, now I feel like I really know how men think.
Okay.
Because based on like your truthfulness to me, and then I feel like I used to think maybe I was weird on the topics of sex and intimacy, but now you don't think you're weird at all at any level. No, I think
you literally think you're unweird at any level.
No, I think I'm actually more normal than I gave myself credit.
Were you about to say smart? Sexy?
Sure, both smart and sexy.
Okay, so you came to a terms and we're going to back this up. We're going to back this up a little bit. The first thing I want to talk about is like our backstory, right? Our backstory, not in the fact the backstory. We're going to talk about our backstory of sex. So you and I did not have sex before we got married.
No, I was raised very Mormon.
Me too.
And I met Garrett at 18.
Okay. I was divorced at the time. I was not 25 at the time. No, wait. I was 25 at the time.
25.
25 and divorced at the time. You were 18 and we meet, and you have not had sex with another person.
No.
I'm your only one.
I mean, if we're broadcasting that, sure.
All right. Well,
I mean, I don't have a problem saying you're my only one. Like, I feel like
I'm not trying to expose a cover up here.
I'm like an anomaly. Like
you are.
Like people are like, what? And I'm like, yeah, it's true.
It's true.
But it's not weird outside of the Mormon culture or even like strict Christian-based cultures, I would say.
Okay, so sex being raised as a young lady, what do you remember being the topic? Like, what was the focus as a young person? Because how you were raised as a child and how your parents interacted with the topic of sex and how you interacted with that conversation as a kid affects a lot of how you see the topic of sexuality. So let's come to, how did this go down in your house? Like, did your mom and dad talk about sex, or how'd this work out?
I think like in a super religious culture such as being Mormon, it's always like, no. That's all it's taught is like, no, you don't have sex. No.
Mm-hmm.
Like they don't, at least in my family, we weren't like super open with communication. And again, I thought maybe we were weird and different, but it turns out that's kind of how a lot of families are. And there's some that are different. I feel like your family is probably a little more vocal and open with communication, but I don't know specifically about sex. So like being raised,
they're open about the sex. I think they're open about the topic of sex, but I don't think it was. It was still weird. Like it was an open topic, but it was not a real fluid topic. It was open, but it wasn't really fluid. So it was kind of an awkward open. It was like an awkward open topic.
Right.
Okay, cool. So mom and dad, but you knew your mom and dad were having sex when you were a kid.
I think like every little kid knows their mom and dad's having sex. Like you don't want to know. I mean,
But you did know.
I'll just tell you.
You did know. You had one moment that I remember you telling me about that confirmed this.
This is awful, and I should probably not share this. But in high school,
that means you definitely
I just
should.
assumed my parents like didn't have sex because like I was like, oh, Mormon people just have sex to have babies. That's how it is, and nobody wants to think of their parents that way. But I remember I had my room in high school. We moved into a new home, and this is super scarring, but my
Scarring. See, this
Okay.
is exactly what I'm talking about.
Well-
you're like, now you're talking about how scarring it was, yet we're
at the
talking
time.
about how sex is
It
actually
was
open.
at the time. Well,
It was scarring for you as a
it
kid
was scarring
because.
because listen, I didn't finish the
All
story.
right, continue.
My bedroom was below theirs,
Okay.
and they had a large headboard. And I kid you not, like 3 to 4 times a week, I was like, God damn it! At first, I was like, what is thumping? Why? Who? What? And then I caught on, and I was like,
How old were you when you're hearing the thumping of the headboard by
I
your
don't know.
parents?
It was like in high school, but I just remember I was like, oh Jesus, why do I have to be?
Did it feel weird to you, or did it feel natural to you at all? Like, meaning like, hey, this is good news. My parents are having sex. They're probably going to stay together.
I think I thought like good for them, but then I also was like, your mind just automatically, you're like, oh, scarring, don't want to see or imagine, no, don't go there. Like you just are like, whoa, like you don't want to think about it, but you're like, good for you guys.
So I never once heard my parents. Like I never, not even
Good
once.
for you.
Well, I didn't even look at you. What is this? All this? You're like shaming everybody for like even being like I celebrate that your parents have sex. Are you excited about the fact that your parents have sex now?
I don't want to hear them have sex ever.
You don't want to hear your parents have sex now, even as a grown woman.
Are you serious?
I'm just shitting with you. Okay, obviously you don't want to hear your parents have sex. They're like in their 60s. Are your parents having sex in their 60s?
Or is this about my parents having sex?
No,
or
this is about our history and about obviously the problem you have with talking about sex, about parents. So is it weird?
here's
Do
how
you
it
want to
goes.
have your parents have sex now?
I
I mean,
don't
I'm
care.
not like saying like you're going to build a billboard and say, Mom and Dad, please have sex.
Here's what I'm saying. Like, being how I was raised, like, we didn't talk about it. Like, even my mom even never really asked me about, like, relationships. She wasn't like, hey, she never had that conversation with me. Like, hey, you have a boyfriend now. Like, you should. She never even had that, like, conversation with me, ever.
You never had the sex
No.
talk at all with your
No,
dad
she
either?
was- like, you would, no.
Did you understand what a penis was?
No.
I mean, how did you learn about a penis if your parents didn't talk to you about it?
I'm not saying I didn't, like, I'm not saying
you didn't investigate. I know we had some investigation went on as a young
right,
lady. But like,
but
how did you find out about it? From your friends?
No, well, obviously in high school, like you just learn about that kind of stuff, whether your parents talk to you about it or not.
But you never had the speech.
No, but my point being
Okay.
is like it was always like nothing. It was always something we just didn't really talk about in my house.
Okay.
And it was kind of like you have sex when you're married because that's what you do. And it wasn't like I could ever felt like I could go to my mom and be like, hey, I'm thinking about having sex with this guy I'm dating. Like, she would be like, oh, no. Like, you know what I mean? There's a lot
Yeah.
of shame and guilt around it. But then in
Did she have any talk? Did she have a talk with you before we got married? Did she have to say, hey, this is how it's going to go down tomorrow?
no, I mean, I feel like at that age, I feel like I would be able to figure it out.
But your parent, but you still, at no point during the process you had any sit down speech. Who was the one
Did
person?
you have a sit down speech?
Yeah, my dad had a weird speech
Yeah,
with me.
see, it's.
But it was, he had the speech with me. It was before my first marriage.
I feel like your mom would have had that speech.
No, my mom didn't have a speech. My mom taught us about my mom
That'd
went
be
to
weird
war
if your
with
mom had that speech with you.
well, it was a weird thing, like because the way my mom was very much about this program, a Christian program called Focus on the Family when I was growing up, which Dr. James Dobson, I believe was his name, which was fantastic. I didn't have any problem with it. And my mom would talk about sex with us as a kid, and I would be taught about it. But the truth was, I didn't even know what a clitoris was until I was like, much, 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 much older.
I don't think.
Like nobody was teaching me the moves. My dad tried to teach me the move, but he was so awkward in talking to me about the move that it kind of fucked up the entire move. I mean, what moves could I really learn from my dad? Anyways?
Yeah, but I think too, like you don't really figure it out till you start to have practice, and like you don't figure out what works. Like a lot of people have had lots of practice and multiple partners,
Right.
And even if you haven't had multiple partners, it's not something. It's like something you just figure it out as you go.
So I would say that you and I have figured we've finally gotten in a rhythm, but it took us a long time to get in a rhythm sexually.
Yeah, I just think.
I mean, we always had sexual chemistry with each other.
Yeah,
But both of us
totally.
kind of came from a fucked up background. And again, this has nothing to do with being Mormon. This is nothing. It's not something we don't practice that religion right now. In our world, haven't for almost a decade. But it's like there's a process inside of my friends who are Catholic, Muslim, Jewish, any form of Christianity where there was some really intense orthodoxy around the topic of sex. And sexuality was shamed at a certain level and not something that was open and talked about. And that has a huge impact on sex inside a relationship. So talk about for you, look,
think-
okay, go ahead. You got something, go.
I think that sex can be very, very different for both men and women. Like in my experience,
Yes.
I can only speak for my experience.
Surely.
But I think, and I have actually talked to more girls and finding that this is more in common. Because there was this place in our marriage where I was just like, hey, I'm not really in the mood to have sex tonight. But
Which, of course, I was blown away. Like most men who
yeah.
don't know, they're like, "Are you shitting me right now? It's Tuesday at 2:13."
Right. And so I was just kind of like, I didn't want to like turn you down, but I was like, I really I'm feeling bloated, and I just feel like I gotta take a
shit.
And like
Shadoobie. Stole that from your
well,
friend.
I
like
mean,
it.
I
Keep
know.
going.
I'm just being super honest. But there's days I'm just like, no. Whereas I feel like a guy, literally, you could be like, hey, do you want to have sex? And if they're like, no, I don't really want to, you take off your shirt and you're like, hey, you want to have sex? They're like, yes, I do.
It's almost impossible to say
right.
no with breasts in your face.
Well, I'm just saying, like,
It
guys
is.
are easily swayed and women are not. So for me, like, being married, I was like, hey, listen, there's like sometimes like I'm not going to want to have sex, but like you put one in for the team because it benefits me like in other areas. Like I know
Right.
that if like you're fulfilled, I'm like, oh, he's traveling. I know he's like on point because he got laid. Or I'm like, hey, oh, Garrett got up. He's like being more helpful with the kids. And I just know it's because it's like win-win both situations. And then there's times where we do have sex and it's really good and there's lots of chemistry and there's lots of foreplay and there's lots of this and that. And so I think when we were first married, I didn't get that concept. I thought there was something wrong with
You
me.
were actually disappointed.
Well, I just was
The very first time you were disappointed.
I just
Share
realized,
this. Are you willing to share this?
Well,
I mean, I've already asked
okay,
you now on
but
the show, so I think you have shared
the
it.
first time is a little awkward, obviously, but then I realized like after practicing and being married for a while,
Yeah.
that like the lead up and the foreplay and all that is actually a lot better than sex itself. Sometimes sex can be really fun, but in the beginning I feel like it's weird and awkward and it's not like this magical thing that I thought, that because it was so taboo growing up that I just, and I had, like I said, I'd kind of mess around with some other stuff, so I thought, oh, this is so great. I think if this is so great, sex is going to be like mind-boggling. And I was like, oh,
Right. Right. Penis and vagina doesn't actually pull it off.
I mean, it does, but there's other stuff that's
For sure.
fun. So I just think
So you were actually disappointed a little bit the very first time because you had waited. You had waited. There's going to be a lot of people who wait to get married. They have sex, but then it scars them. It scars them, and this is what I'm talking about. It scarred you a little bit.
No. I'll tell you what happened. I remember on our honeymoon thinking like, what? Oh, what's wrong with me? Why wasn't that as fun as I was anticipating?
Right.
And because I didn't know, like, even if I had friends in college and that were sleeping with guys, like, you don't have, like, that clear of communication with your college friends. You're not, like, you're more like, oh, you slept with him, haha, like, whatever, blah, blah, blah. And now as you get older, I feel like you're open with your communication and even just, like, talking to other girls and stuff. And, like, I'm like, oh, I don't think I'm, like, not normal. You know what I mean?
Okay, so we have two things that we're looking at here in today's show. The first one is the background of you sexually. Like where did you come from? What was the frame that you came from? Our children are being raised in a very different environment about sexuality. We actually will tell our children, hey, you need to go to bed because mom and dad are about to
I feel like
have sex.
There's got to be a backstory to that. Like I have a little 10-year-old daughter who has like the worst anxiety at night. She like cannot sleep. She literally like wants me to like hang out with her, like tell her stories and like just calm her down. Whereas like my 6-year-old will pass out anywhere. I could be like, go to bed. She's like, okay, good night, mom. My 10-year-old just
she'll fall asleep on the kitchen
floor. She has
floor.
like anxiety at night. And like I would be like, I'm so tired of doing the routine. Like you're 10. So at 10, she's in 5th grade and she's also like, mom, what's sex? So we had the sex talk with her. We told her.
Who had the sex talk with her?
I can't believe you did that without
I had
me.
the
That's
sex
another
talk. We'll talk about that here in a moment because I had the sex talk with her.
I was kind of bugged at that. But so anyway, I was like, I cannot get this. Like, she's old enough. She knows. I don't need to go lay down with her, tickle her back, and tell her 14 stories. So I just literally, like, one day.
Which worked when she was young.
Yeah, but she was milking it. And she was like, my anxiety. And I was
She
like,
was.
no, you. Like, I think she was just saying that to stay up later. So now I was like, we had the sex talk with her, and like I said, I was like, Bailey, you need to go to bed. And I'm like, and don't come in our room because Dad and I are going to be having sex, just so you know. And she's like, that's so gross. And I was like, I'm sorry, but I knew. I was like, yeah, no kid wants to walk in on that. So like literally it works. It's worked like every time.
Yeah, the only unfortunate part is that Danielle's a liar because only half the times that she says that do we actually have sex.
She's gonna just grow up and be like, my parents had sex every
My
night.
parents had
Yeah, we
she's
did.
gonna be my parents had sex literally every night. How did you know? Because my mom and dad told me they had sex every night. What they only knew is that Danielle was lying, and only 50% of the time they were having sex.
Hey.
Okay, cool. So listen, let's continue. Young married sex. And the exposure comes down to belief systems and behind it. So if you were looking at this from a parenting perspective and trying, like Bailey asked me about sex. It came up because they started having their sex ed talk in 5th grade at school. And I actually got taken out of sex ed training in school. My mom had me pulled out.
That makes sense.
So I had to go to the library. So this is why I didn't know what a clitoris was, because I was literally in the library studying social studies or something.
Keep you sheltered?
Well, I mean, it kind of worked for a time. And then I was like, well, I don't know what a clitoris is. I should find out what the fuck all the rest of this is going on. And then I went off the deep end. But here inside of this would
You
debate.
did not go off the deep end.
The deep end, not in the deep end. Deep end.
No, you never went off the deep end.
All right. I appreciate your vote of confidence. Let's continue to be here in this topic with Bailey. So Bailey starts asking me these questions. And I just said, it was a kind of a moment of decision for me. I was like, how far do where do I go with this? Do I take this all the way? Do I have this conversation? Little I realized that I was actually doing something that would scar Danielle for life, which was I was having the talk. But you were connected to having the talk with her. You wanted to have this talk with her.
I just felt like I still think of her as like so little, and then she started asking questions, and you just told her, and I was like, oh, why do you like tell me? Like that feels like, but I don't know. Maybe it was
I told her
better,
everything.
But it was just kind of upfront and casual.
I mean, here's the deal. How many times did you see anything truly sexual on television when you were growing up? Do you remember seeing anything sexual on television?
Because I was on
sex. Did you see naked bodies on TV?
Yes, let me tell you what happened.
All right.
So I had older brothers and sisters. I was the youngest. Well, I wasn't the youngest. I had a little sister, but there's
basically the youngest, because
there's
she's like a
10-year
decade
gap.
behind you. Yeah.
Yeah. So I was like the youngest, and I feel like at the end of 5 kids, my parents were kind of like, I would get babysat a lot by my older brothers and sisters.
Right.
And I feel like I'm more scarred by that. But anything, they were always watching bad movies, and like, oh man, I felt like I got exposed a lot from being babysat by my older brothers and sisters.
Were they bad movies, or they were just movies that showed sex? Isn't that crazy to see?
I don't know.
Like even the little training that we're talking about, it still comes out like, like people we're around family members of mine who will call it, bumping uglies. Like a vagina and a penis is ugly or something.
I just am like a big fan of like correct terminology. So I'm like, they had sex. That's a penis. That's a vagina.
Yeah, we've never told our kids from a young age that they should call it anything else.
I think it makes it less weird. You don't want to get married and be like, you want to bump uglies?
Hey babe, you're looking fantastic. You want to bump some uglies right now?
I just feel like that wouldn't go over well.
Yeah, that wouldn't go over well at all. All right, so you and I were raised not really open in the topic of sex. From our parents. It wasn't something that we were naturally talking about all the time. We didn't have tons of experience with it. So here we are married, and we're kind of stepping into a bit of confusion. There's a bit of confusion for you and I as a couple. And this continues, and I'm hurting about it. I'm upset about it. We're not communicating well about it. We're having talk. It's not like we're not having sex, but we're going through phases of ups and downs, and I get it that it happens with couples, so don't pull that justification bullshit on me that you always do. Well, it's how it is normally with everyone. You and I don't talk very good about sex in the beginning.
You know what I'm realizing too?
All right, what are you realizing?
I think that regardless if you had sex before you're married or not, being married and having an open relationship to talk about sex is like totally...
It's tough.
Because, I mean...
Why do you think it's tough?
Well, I have like friends that have like, oh, I've slept with like X amount of guys, and then like they still deal with the same problems that you and I have. I think just being married, it's different. It's like you get married.
What do you think is different?
You know what is different about it?
What is it that creates the difference? Go.
When you're, and I think I had this conversation with you before. Like
okay.
When you're dating, even if you're super comfortable with somebody, like. You always kind of play the game a little bit. Do you know what I mean?
Okay.
So like even if you're like not in the mood when you're dating, you're kind of like, oh, and you like.
But you'll still kind of go along with it.
Yeah, you kind of are like flirty. And sometimes, and this can even go being married, like sometimes you're like, I'm not in the mood at all, but you kind of play that role and you're like, are like, all right, and you're like, I don't know, something about getting the guy's attention, all of a sudden you're kind of into it.
Right.
And so I think what happens when you get married, at least from my perspective and talking to other women, is you get married and there's like that, there's no longer that role play of like being kind of flirtatious. You're like, I'm fucking tired. And like when the husband like comes on to you, you're like, there's no more flirting because you're usually pissed. You're like, I worked, I put the kids to bed, I did this and this and this, and you don't turn it on. Do you know what I mean? And so guys, I think going into the whole married role of having sex, they start to, at least this is what we experienced, is like,
Right.
I think the guy starts to feel super shut down because in the dating world, you're like, oh, and you're like, yeah, and even if you're not in the mood, you always kind of entertain it and see where it goes. And so like when you get married, you're just tired and there's no filter. You're just kind of like, I'm tired. You know what I mean? And it loses.
Oh, I know what you mean.
It loses a little
I have
bit,
a lot of experience with that one, with the shutdown.
But it loses, I think, for guys when they feel like shut down, then they're kind of like, it puts this weird tension on marriage and sexual relationships within being married. And so for me, like, I think we kind of had to come to this place where we both kind of chilled out a little bit. And I don't know how to describe it other than like I finally like understood. I was like, I still need to be like kind of flirty, or I still need to be like, hey, yeah, let's go for it. You know what I mean? And not be so like, ooh, I'm tired. You know what I mean? Like,
okay, so let's stop there for a second. Because this shit that you're talking about is an important one. You just like blew past a decade and sex therapy and a whole bunch of other counseling sessions and like 100 fights at big restaurants over dinner over sex. So you and I were not good communicators about sex, and this is a struggle that I watch happen with men inside of Wake Up Warrior.
Right.
You hear about it at the salon, right? There's this challenge with married couples being able to talk about what they want and being able to talk about what's not working and be able to come to a place of creating something that's working. You and I couldn't do this. Like, we would fight about this over and over and over again. What did it feel like from your side, knowing that inevitably a fight about sex was coming? Because I was probably at war with you and or like hiding from you or like emotionally withdrawing.
Can I ask you like a really serious question?
No, only funny questions on this show. Sure, go.
Okay, so there was a point in our relationship, and I don't know if I kind of surrendered and you kind of surrendered too. Like when we would like talk about sex or when we'd get in an argument, I don't know how to describe it, but I feel like you kind of chilled out a little bit. Like, do you feel
Did you just answer my question with a question without answering my question?
Do you feel
You can't turn this on me, reframing queen. This is exactly how shit used to go when we would try to talk about sex. You would reframe it on me. You can't reframe me on my own show. I will answer your question second after you answer my first question.
No, what was your first question?
See, that's exactly what happens is you literally.
No, I'm just
right now, real time on this show, you were hearing what happened.
In order for me to answer your question correctly,
oh shit!
I need to know.
You're so full of shit. I love that you're going here right now.
Okay.
All right, so I'm going to answer my question.
Called accountability, babe.
It's called Here's what.
Own your shit.
Okay, I'll own my shit with Miss Reframe, Never Answer Question, make it about the husband. Here's the deal. There are men out there right now that are listening to this, and you get exactly what's going on here, which is the man, because the sex drive is typically higher in a man, the man is the one who's left in this confusing game of trying to figure it out. Here's what would happen. Danielle and I didn't know how to approach the conversation about sex. Not in a healthy way with her. So I would come in kind of this weird game. And my wife is not a touchy-feely person. Maybe you're married to a touchy-feely woman. So it was weird because my wife doesn't even want to hold hands too often, doesn't like to cuddle, doesn't want to be touched.
I like cuddling.
You don't like cuddling unless it's 6 o'clock in the morning.
I like
You don't cuddling at night?
No, I like cuddling at night.
Since when?
If there's no expectations.
See, exactly. So I'm cuddling with her, obviously. I mean, I've got this beautiful ass leaned up against me,
sometimes
right up against my penis. Yeah, well, exactly. It's like she's leaning. I'm being totally turned on by the cuddle thing.
Just kidding.
You know, Johnny's waking up down low. But there's no, anyways, we didn't know how to do this. And so I would try to be in this place of connection with Danielle, but I didn't know how. So then here's the game that I would play. So I'll explain the game that stopped, and then Miss Reframe over here is going to get fucking honest about this for the first time.
Okay.
Here's what happened to me. I would go from, hey, babe, let's go. But it was like this twisted 15-year-old, like this 15-year-old, like weird seduction game as a married guy, which was kind of like this desperate, oh my God, I just saw titties thing in the bathroom. Oh, hey. And then I would do this weird thing. Now, it was not in my advantage to do this. right? It was not. I was not getting anywhere with this, but I continued to do this for like a decade, which is this weird kind of like I felt uncomfortable, so I didn't know how to approach it. When you're dating or you don't have kids and you don't have the mortgage and all the stress, you just kind of approach it from the way that you do it.
Do guys feel entitled to sex if they don't know any better in the beginning?
For sure. You're married. You're like, woman, a part of being married is me getting laid. This goes through every guy's mind. Every guy. What goes through a woman's mind about the sex topic once you get married? Because guys feel like, most men that I've ever met feel like, hey, shit, we're married now.
I think that women don't.
Sex is part of the game. Let's go.
I think
there's a lot of women that say this is true too. How do you feel about this?
You know what? It's interesting. Again, it goes back to when you're dating, and maybe specifically because for us it was very taboo. But I think you guys get married and they just do they want to just get laid every night? And women are like, we didn't have sex every night when we were dating.
I don't mean you and I don't have sex every night. I mean, we've never had sex every night for longer than maybe a couple nights in a row. So it's not. I don't think it's like to that point of I feel like I need to get laid every night. I think what most men end up struggling with, particularly married men who come from conservative backgrounds or men who came. And the crazy part is for me to connect with guys and to know men who were completely sexually like fulfilled when they were single, but then shit changed once babies came and the marriage came and you were together for a decade and things started shifting. All of a sudden there was this new experience with sex and it became awkward for a man to try to approach it in marriage. Like there were many times I felt like it would have been easier for me to go flirt with the neighbor woman than it would be to actually flirt with you because I was so triggered and felt so rejected for so many years that it put me into this weird place where I didn't even know how to approach you.
Do you want to hear my magical formula?
Do you want to? No, I want to hear you take responsibility for rejecting for a decade.
Oh, for sure.
Okay, talk about this to women who might be listening.
Do you want to know my magical formula?
After you talk about the rejection.
No, I'm going to tell you my magical formula.
And then you're coming back to the rejection.
So
you're going to try to do this to forget, and I'm going to bring you back.
Okay, so the rejection part, I realized by me rejecting him, he went into pouty mode, which made me less attracted to him.
True.
So then I wanted to not have sex even more. I'd be
like,
because he went into this pouty asshole mode, and I was like,
explain pouty asshole.
Okay, so it was almost like you were like, I'll show her, but so you were very standoffish. You were very standoffish, but you were also like an asshole. Like things you would normally do that you like are like that weren't a big deal to you. Like you take the kids to school and you loved it, but it was like when all of a sudden you were in pouty asshole mode, you'd be like, I need you to take the kids to school every morning, and I was like, okay. It was like it was just like you were trying to like punish me, and I was
trying to punish you.
So then I was almost like
it wasn't working.
Less attracted to you. I was like, dude, like, do you ever want to get laid? And then we ran into the problem where it was like you were getting laid, but I wasn't really into it. And you were like, I want you to want to have sex. And I was like, then fucking man up. But I didn't know how to like describe it other than I was just
other than say fucking man up.
I know, but
I would be sitting there going,
and then it would backfire, and then you're like, you're
pissed.
a bitch. And then I was like, well, you're a dick. And like, what? So here's my magical formula.
All right, I'm ready.
I
Give it
answered
to
your
us.
question, then here's my magical
Okay,
formula.
magic formula, 3, 2, 1, go. Everyone's anticipating the magic. This is a big build up to this.
Okay, here is your magical formula. Because guys will, in my experience, men will want to. I know there's a lot of guys that like travel a lot and work a lot. I know you work a lot, but I do know that when
working a lot causes a high demand for sex inside of a man.
But no, let me not lose focus on my magical formula.
Okay, go magical formula.
You can't lose connection. Like we both work a lot, but we make a lot of time to like reconnect, like date nights, things like that. And in my magical formula to do that is you have to have porn star sex at least every third time.
I didn't even know about this magic formula until right now.
Yes. You're welcome.
I like where this is going. All right, continue with this porn star sex.
So you can have
Okay, I like this. Keep going. Keep going.
Quit getting
I'm taking
so excited.
Notes.
So you can have you can do like quickies. And if your husband's like, rubbing you up and down, you're like sitting there, you're laying in bed, you're like, I literally want to throw up right now. Not because you're touching me, but you just don't feel good, or you're just like, I had a hard day, or I feel like I need to take a shower, or whatever it is.
Right.
But you like, Garrett comes over and he's rubbing my back and whatever. I'm like, oh, he wants to have sex, but I'm not in the mood. But instead of like saying like, not tonight, I'm just like.
Which you did for like a decade.
I know, because I was like, I'm not into it. And you get so comfortable in a relationship, I'd just be like, no. And then so now I'm just like, if you're kind of like if we happen to go to bed at the same time and the kids are in bed and it's like, wow, that doesn't happen, that's kind of rare. I mean,
right.
So when it does happen, it's like Garrett's always like, it's go time. So I know that, and he'll start like tickling my back. I'm like, okay, he wants to have sex, but I'll be like, hey babe, and I just jump on him and screw him. I mean, it doesn't have to be like porn star sex. I just jump on. So we call it a quickie. I'm just like, hey, and I know that's what he wants, and that's great. But if you don't have porn star sex about every third time, I think you start to feel a little bit disconnected. You're kind of like, oh, you didn't have fun, and I'm like, no, I have fun, but like, you got to make it really fun.
Well, there's two things.
Okay, wait, I didn't finish.
Continue with the magic formula. All right, so we have quickies for a couple times, then we have porn star sex. Describe what this means to a woman in case she doesn't know.
You just put on a show. I mean,
what does a show look like?
I don't know how.
Like, give me energetically how your attitude changes.
No, you just like you act like you're a porn star. You put on a show. I don't know how to describe it. Like,
so if you're not sure what that is, go watch some porn.
Go watch a porn,
so you can see how we're going.
Just have a good time. Like, it's
do
fine.
You have a good time when you're in porn star sex mode?
Yeah, I mean,
okay.
Sometimes when I have porn star sex, I have to have a drink in me. I'm not gonna lie.
For sure. Well, it loosens you up a little bit. Yeah. I'm sure some women can do that without the alcohol.
Drink, yeah, for sure. If you don't drink, if your husband gives you a nice massage, like I know with
we use a massage technique.
Yeah, like if I'm not drinking and I'm like I want to relax a little bit, I'm like, hey, will you give me a 10-minute massage? And it just like relaxes me, and then I can like kind of get into it.
Okay.
So, anyways, that's my theory.
So resolution of the cocktail could be a massage.
What this does is I realize like Garrett you want to put more into me. You're like, how can I help with the kids? If I'm like, hey, can you do this for me? Hey, can you help me with work? Can you do this? You're more like feeding my needs.
Yes.
And so then it's like win-win for everybody. But we can't just like I noticed in our sexual relationship, it's like we couldn't just have quickies every time because you're like, I want you to want it. And like you said, men's sex drive is typically higher than women's. And so I was just like, okay, like that's fine. I need to kind of put one in for the team. And
right.
But then also make sure we connect, and then everybody gets what they want.
So it started like this conversation we're having right here, like it would have been it was just a win to get to a point where she was willing to have, like, was open to it, and the rejection factor, which I'm going to come back to you after your magic formula. Okay. I had spent a decade being rejected, and I didn't know how to deal with it. Like, literally didn't know how to deal with it as a man. You know, here you are. I love this woman. I want to be with this woman. You know, we have children together. We're building this life together. Yet the truth is, I feel horribly inadequate as a man around her because I've been rejected so many times. No, was like she was being taught as a teenager, and then we got married, and it was like, no. And so I'm asking you, like, as a woman, like, do you just not realize, or did you just not give a shit about the emotional consequence for being in the no constantly before you made this shift to the magic formula?
As a woman, I kind of felt like my needs weren't being met. And so I probably was maybe being a little selfish in the sense that I was like, screw you, my needs aren't being met. But I realized when your needs were met more, you would kind of even chill out with me. You weren't the pouty, needy thing didn't happen. Mm-hmm. Like you were more, like you just naturally would do things for me.
Right.
You know what I mean?
For sure.
Like it wasn't like a big deal. We actually wanted to spend time together. I didn't feel like I was like walking on eggshells. So I don't know. I think every couple is going to have kind of their formula with what works in that department. But I forgot what the specific age.
No, it was just a rejection factor. And the rejection factor is what led me to the pouty, angry asshole.
At the same time that I was rejecting you, I definitely feel like you've gone more all in as us as a couple.
100%.
So
let's talk about where we are right now.
But what shifted in you to where
I started realizing
you kind of backed off and you weren't in like pouty asshole mode, but you kept coming back and like you really, what I noticed for us is you just kept coming back wanting to like help. You're like, let's do counseling, let's do this, like, which for me is like, okay, he's all in. Like I have to give him, I'm like some credit for trying, and maybe I need to look at myself a little bit different and see what I could do. And I'm stubborn, and so I was like, no, you shouldn't want to have sex to want to do these things for me, but that's how men operate, and it's not just about the sex. It's kind of like give and take on both sides.
Well, there's two things inside. I'm gonna share 3 points. Point number 1, there is a desire for penis and vagina, no question about it. Orgasm, want to have it. But there's also something beyond that as a man, at least for me, which was I wanted to be wanted, which means I wanted to feel like I was the prize of desire from my wife. And that's where the porn star sex idea came in, which is like this willingness to be all in. And it's not just like, I'm talking about the quickie. I started calling the quickie vaginal masturbation. And there was a point inside of this in our marriage where it was that was like all that was available was this quickie sex where honestly there was even times I had to like move your ass. I had to grab your hips and like move you because you were not into it at all. It was like, oh, I'm just doing this to help him. And I started to build up this huge resentment that supported a story. Point number 2. I had a story, and my story was that my wife didn't want me and didn't want sex. And I was like, maybe there's another man she's supposed to be with where she would actually be sexually activated and want to be with that man. And maybe I just needed to be with a different woman who sexually would be with me in that way. And so there was a story that I had playing that Danielle wasn't a sexually intimate woman. That like she was an ice princess. So I had a story that was running. Now we're sitting in therapy, sex therapy. You and I, sex therapy, Newport, California. No, Huntington Beach, California. Is that where she was at? Where was our therapist there?
I don't remember. We had 2.
We had two. I just heard kids.
I did too.
I forgot. There's like kids way outside the studio. I was like the jiu-jitsu studio outside of our offices. Okay, I was like, oh my God, is there kids like here? Our kids are here? How the hell did that happen? So we went to therapy and we're sitting in therapy and you say one thing to the therapist, and maybe it was the first therapist we gone to, I don't know, but you said something, you're like, I want to want you. Like, I want to get laid. I want to have sex. I want to have orgasms. And you use some terminology like that, sitting in therapy, and I'm sitting next to you when you say this, and I'm like, my story's shattered. Because I'm like, wait a second, this is the same woman in my mind. I'm not saying that's what she ever told me. In my mind, I created a story that my wife didn't want to have sex, and she didn't want to have sex with me, and that she was just one in a million, where she was the broken one who didn't sexually want to be sexualized. And she was beautiful in this Barbie, and I called her Barbie in a box. This beautiful woman in a box who didn't want to have sex and didn't want to be touched. And yet in that moment, you shattered my story. And it came out of your mouth. And I was like, whoa. And so that led me to a whole new game, which was this idea that I could create a new way of operating as a man with my wife. I was like, wait a second. If my story that Danielle doesn't want to have sex and she doesn't want to have sex with me and she's not into sex, if that story's not true, because I just heard her say, I want to be fucked, I want to get laid, I want to have orgasms, I want to want you too. And I'm sitting there in therapy, I'm like, this does not line up with what my truth is that I've been living for like 12 years. I'm sitting right next to a woman who my story has been, does not want me, does not want to have sex, and I probably need to be with somebody else, and she probably needs to be with somebody else, is shattered in the middle of therapy. And from that place, I chose to change. And that's when I started dressing better, and date nights became like I started dressing better. I stopped putting all this weird pressure, and I stopped the weirdo.
Yeah, you had less weird energy. Like, it's like I wanted to want you, but I was like, there was like a wall. Like, you wouldn't let me in. And maybe it was your story. I don't know.
It was for sure my story. My story was that my story was such that it was so powerful for me that no matter how you showed up, so that's why I would go to this weird kind of giggly sabotage 15-year-old boy bullshit, grab your ass, pinch it, but not like in like a I'm the man way. It was like in a I'm the boy way. And you're like, why is this boy currently touching me? I'll throw one in for the team, boy, man.
I think, your energy definitely changed and shifted. And I don't know. I notice even for you, it was like you kind of learned to hold back a little bit, which was like sexy to me.
Yeah.
I don't know.
For sure.
Your whole energy kind of changed. And so then I'm like, oh, you're holding back.
My story changed, and inside of my story, our relationship sexually changed. Now we're gonna kind of bring this show to a conclusion.
Okay.
We've talked a lot about sex. We're going to talk about sex once a month on one of the shows. Not going to be our focus every single week. Some shows talk about sex all the time. We realize that's an issue, but there's a lot of other shit going on besides sex. But we're going to summarize this with a couple key points from today's show. First off, give them the formula. What's the formula? This is for the ladies out there. What is the formula?
I don't know, because I was just thinking, too, I have a lot of other friends and people I know that are not in the best place in their relationship.
Sure.
And some people will say, oh, I'm never having sex. Like, I'm having sex like once a year. And I'm like, oh, that's a problem. And then there's other couples that are like, I have sex like every other night. And I'm like, oh, weird. But I realize it's the energy behind sex, and you have to find out the formula that works for you. And so for me, because your energy shifted and changed, I realized that I desired you and wanted you more, but not as probably as much as you want me, because I'm I think guys, or at least in our experience, like you're more.
I could realistically have sex every other day.
Yeah. Yeah.
Every day would be too much. We've pushed
I've
this.
noticed
Like
that, yeah.
it'd be too much. It's like oh, I don't really want it every day.
Yeah.
It kills all the tension. But every other,
I like the tension.
every
so-
day, 2 days to 3 days
Yeah,
for sure.
for sure.
And
But
every
that's
third
my
one has
formula
to be
with you.
porn star
yes,
sex.
and that's my formula with you. Like if we go more than 3 days, I'm like, ooh, he's not pouty, but I'm like, he's getting a little edgy. And so I'm like, I need a happy Garrett, happy marriage.
Oh, happy Garrett, happy marriage. It used to be happy wife, happy life, happy Garrett, happy
Garrett.
happy Garrett, happy marriage.
So
Okay.
I realize, like, I'm like, well, I need my needs met as well, and they may not be just like sexual needs, but I need other areas like my other needs met. We can go into those later if you want. There's a book called like Love Languages that helps you kind of figure out your partner's
Good resource.
Yeah. So anyway, you have to kind of find out what your specific formula is. But my formula was like, okay, don't go more than 3 days, and about every third time, make sure you just really give it a go.
Yeah, and when we use the porn star sex thing, we're not saying like you have to look at porn together. We've used that as a tool in the past to learn a little bit more about each other. But I'm saying
I think it's just more than like a quickie. Like it could go a couple hours. You could have foreplay. You could just have fun with it. You know what I mean?
You could open up the doors in your master bedroom and allow the brisk ocean air to flow in while the waves crash, causing
Did you just get like a
causing
flash?
causing
Just like
goosebumps to
like a
appear
flash.
on your ass cheeks.
I think that you like. I think that you hold on. See,
I
here's
love
what
those.
happens.
I
when you
fucking
have-
love that
when
night.
you
I
have-
love porn star
listen,
night. I didn't even know. I'm
I
finding
know.
out on this show that
See,
this is
here's-
actually a thing, and I
this is what
fucking
I'll
love
tell you.
it. It like
Guys,
makes my mind fall in
I
love
think
with you
that
even
guys,
more.
when you do have porn star sex, they have something stored in the database that they can go back to when they need to.
Yes.
And it's with their wife.
Say it one more time.
Say it one more time.
Say it one more time.
I was just saying, like, if you have really good sex, like, I think for men, I don't know. I'm not a guy.
No, I'm going to
But I
guarantee.
can
That's
just
why I'm saying say it
imagine, like,
again.
I think that sex is just something that pops up in guys' head. And if you have, like, really good sex, they're not, like, thinking about somebody else or thinking about porn. They literally are, like, thinking about last night with their wife. And they're like, that was fucking awesome. And then they're like, you know what? I think I want to take my wife on a trip or whatever. Like,
Right.
then that puts their focus on the wife and not, like, wandering, like, oh, I wonder what it would be like to sleep with this girl over here, you know?
Right.
So that's the benefits to women getting into it is like you want to keep your man focused, have a good time.
And that's our formula for this week's show, which is change it up, quickie porn star. Quickie porn star. However you play it off, we'll call it the quickie porn star. We'll call it the QQPS.
Let's not. That's too many.
Hashtag QQPS. Nah, that doesn't work out so well. So anyways,
Find your formula.
there's our formula. The second piece of this, and this is going to be my tip for the guys as we wrap up today's show. Gentlemen, you have stories about your wife sexually. I had a story about my wife. She's beautiful. She's amazing. I knew all of these things, but I had a story about her that she could never escape from. No matter how she behaved, no matter how she operated, no matter how much she reacted to me, no matter how much she loved me, no matter how much she tried, no matter how much effort she put in, I held my wife hostage inside of a fucking story. And the story was my wife doesn't want sex, isn't sexual in nature, doesn't want to have sex and be sexual in nature with me. And that must mean we're not supposed to be together. We should be with other people. Like this story was running in the background forever. I'm going to ask you a question on this. Like, could you tell like that energetically I was a little fucking bipolar because of this story? You may not. You're just finding out about this story right now on the show too. I don't think I've ever told you this.
I didn't know how to describe it, but that makes sense. You just shifted your story because I was like, all of a sudden you just relaxed, and I wasn't on. I call it eggshells, where you're just like, oh, is he gonna blow up or not? It was like a combination of finding the formula and you kind of relaxing that made us both just be at this like harmonious place.
Right. No, it was. Like that harmony came down to the story change. So we have two tips inside of this week in our show. We have one for the women, right? Which is, we call it what did you call it? The formula? You didn't call it the formula.
Find your formula.
You called it, find your formula.
Find your
formula. Find your formula. Right? It might be in the shower. Maybe that's your porn star
your
style.
formula is like, how often does your guy need to be laid, and how often do you need does putting on porn star sex help in your relationship? And there's no way to find out unless you test it. So it doesn't. I'm not talking about positions. I'm just saying find your formula where everybody's happy.
Might be happening in the shower.
Okay.
All right. The second piece is, gentlemen, this one goes to you, is you're going to have to change your story. And I'm going to challenge you to investigate the story that you have about your wife inside of the topic of sex. and that the story that you're telling yourself may not be giving you the tools that you need. And if you're a man and you're looking for a little more guidance inside of this, there's an entire brotherhood of men around the globe, found at Wake Up Warrior, that are studying the doctrine inside of the habitable lifestyle. This is a lifestyle and also the belief system that helps shift the way I saw my marriage, my business, my body, my being, and my entire life. You can pick that up and check that book up, found at warriorbook.com. For ladies listening to the show who have a man in their life that you'd like to start getting on this, we'd love to have you back here on this show, but the Warrior Book will be a huge resource for you also. You can pick that same book up at warriorbook.com and give that resource to your man and invite him to join us and take a stand into this idea of what it actually means to be a man. Now, our final idea inside of this around this show, though, is this. Hey, I love you.
I was about to kiss the mic.
I love you. You're like, oh, I kiss you. Here, I kiss you. It's like doing FaceTime with the kids. I love you. Give you a little kiss on the mic.
Well, because it's like I can hear you right there. And I was
yeah.
like, oh, thank you.
Oh, you're welcome. So anyway, sex is great for us. Like, I love it. And I sure appreciate like the investment you made in our sex life. I appreciate who you've become inside of that. And you know what? I love who we've become as a couple sexually.
Last thing.
Yes, go. You got something.
I got one thing.
Okay.
Women may not want to hear that, hey, you have to have porn star sex. I'm not saying that, but I like that you touch base on like your story.
Yeah, the guy's fucked up story.
I know. And when you changed your story, I wanted to have sex with you, and like putting on, like, having good sex wasn't that big of a deal. Whereas before, when I felt like awkward and tense and I was so pissed at you, the only thing I could offer you and be like was like
a hand job and a quickie.
No, because I was like, I can't, and I think guys would know if you weren't getting into it. And so it may start with just a shift on your story versus it's my story on you or your story on me. You may have to shift your story of what you on that topic.
Well, I think at some level you shifted your story about me too, because you think I was like a total psychopath.
I told you because I was like, oh my God, like do guys really want sex? You're almost like, oh, you're such a pervert. Why do you want sex every day? And then I was like, you know what? It's like, it doesn't have to be that big of a deal, you know? And then I realized I'm like, if I'm being real honest, I know we're closing the show up, but I was like, if I'm being real honest, like, and we have talked about this before, I was like, you don't really need sex every day.
No, I don't need sex every day. You thought I needed sex every day.
No, you could, but we're both so busy.
Yeah,
like,
we
would have to schedule in sex every day, really.
I wouldn't want sex every day.
But like every 3 days is
in
like,
Cabo for 4 days, I could have sex every day.
Yeah.
Because we're on vacation. But Hawaii for 7 days, I could have sex 7 days. But just regular life, not having sex every day.
That's what I just wanted to say is like it starts with I would say a mind shift or a story change on both sides. And then from there, find out what your magic formula is.
Well, there you go. I hope
love
that
and light. Good night. This is Garrett J. White.
Signing off, saying love and light. Actually, one last piece I'm going to add to this for you guys, not in content, which is if you'd like to participate or we'd love to hear about how things are going for you. One of the biggest solutions to being able to take your marriage to another level is date night. Many of the conversations that we talk about here on this show are actual conversations that we had during not one, but many date nights. And if you're not going out regularly every single week with your spouse, without your children, and without any friends, just the two of you having a conversation, we would challenge you this week to not only do that, but also to begin the initial conversation of the topic of sex with one another. And if that helps, you may even just listen to this particular show or watch it together, and then afterwards begin to have a conversation about the history from where you've both come sexually, and also begin to open up, even here in this conversation, Danielle and I have opened up some ideas that neither one of us had actually shared with each other before, too. So we're still learning and growing, and it looks like my wife has one more idea, but I'm going to throw...
I think in the beginning you're both going to be triggered, but you have to be in a place of like...
Going to be, not think 100% going to be triggered.
Yeah.
Any suggestions for this as they go into the date night knowing they're probably going to be triggered?
I've always told all couples, I'm like, we did therapy for a minute, and it made it nice because...
1 minute? Don't downplay it.
It wasn't like...
We did like 27 sessions.
Okay. But what I was saying is it creates a sounding board. So if you cannot have that conversation with your significant other where you're constantly getting triggered, if both of you are willing to go see somebody who can kind of intervene and be that sounding board for you, you might have better luck with your communication. And then when you feel like you're in a safe space where you can start to talk about it more outside of a therapist, then that may be like the start that you need to take.
I agree, 100%. We were not doing so well. We were doing okay on the date night topic, but it was really therapy.
There was so much triggering.
So much.
It was a lot of triggering. I think we wanted to be on the same page, but we'd end up fighting, and then nothing. Then you're just running in circles, and nothing really progresses forward. So.
We have one last invitation here as part of the show. We want you guys to be part of the show with us. Now, to do that as a listener is going to come down to the following. You can hang out over at dateyourwifenow.com, which is a place where we find all the show notes, tips, and tricks here for this particular show. You'll be able to get the written version, audio and video version of this show. You'll also be able to find a place where you can submit questions and topics that you would like us to discuss here on the show. And if you'd like, we'll even let you submit videos, audios, or emails with your thoughts, inserted ideas, or the results that you're seeing when it comes to your particular date nights. We'd love to get those from you. To get more on how to be involved in the show, head on over to dateyourwifenow.com. My wife is... You're just smiling. Okay, cool. You're just smiling, and we're ending this show. This brings us to a conclusion here of episode number 2 of the Date Your Wife podcast. Thank you so much for being here. Make sure you're subscribed in iTunes, Google Play, or Stitcher to the show, and or following us on YouTube or Facebook by the same name. But you can gather all of that information by heading on over to dateyourwifenow.com. Last thoughts? That's it. You're just doing the smile. All right, that's it. All right, you guys, have a great rest of your day. This episode is coming to a close now.